Many survivors of great suffering, of massacres, become insular. What was amazing about Raphael Lemkin, a rural wunderkind of sorts, was that he saw the universal connection with victims and the universal capacity to carry out harms of great magnitude. And that led him to have great conviction that no one was safe.
Dr. Lemkin, could you give us a little background on how you came to be interested in this genocide fight originally?
It leads me very far back to my childhood. Everybody has sentimental memories from childhood, and everybody has a book he loved most. One of my inspirations in this field was a book by Sienkiewicz, Quo Vadis, which described the terrible sufferings of early Christians. Later on, I became interested in genocide because it happened so many times.
Most people don't believe that other people are capable of these kinds of crimes, even today. But Lemkin knew.
In Rwanda, up to 200,000 people have died in a month.
About 1.3 million Syrians have fled their country's bloody two-year conflict.
Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir has been accused of masterminding a campaign of genocide in Darfur.
One of the problems that some survivors have, it is to accept how their beloved ones were killed. I'm myself a survivor of genocide. I might say that if today is Darfur, tomorrow it might be somewhere else.
As a lawyer, I thought crime should not be punished by the victims, but should be punished by international law.
Lemkin came with a new idea, to transform these massacres into a crime, use the law to bind humanity, to prevent crimes. And that was the vision of Lemkin.
Lemkin will look back, wherever he may be in heaven, or if there is such a place, if they ever give me a pass to go up there, he'll be saying, look, everybody knows about genocide. Everybody condemns genocide. They still commit it. But nevertheless, in principle, they have come a long way. And I say, look, you can only build this temple of the law one stone at a time. And I am a builder of that temple. I'm putting one stone on it at a time.
Ujya niba bisigaye mu rugo kandi ukwezi n'igice si kera. When I have to go back. It takes 1 or 2 days to feel that you can leave the family and go again. But I cannot take them where I'm going.
Scattered across this vast, arid landscape is the evidence of what is said to be a deliberate attempt to destroy an entire population.
Sudan's President Omar al-Bashir has masterminded a genocide in Darfur.
Refugees who live in camps in eastern Chad have witnessed children being thrown into the fire, have gone and picked up the limbs of their family members and buried them, have seen their villages torched, their livelihoods, their cattle, everything taken. And Darfur is ongoing. The violence is ongoing, the atrocities are ongoing.
Al-Bashir forces absolutely targeted these people. It's exactly what Lemkin was trying to avoid. I think he will end badly. Bashir will end badly, but who will survive in Darfur? What happened with the people there? My fear is Darfur could be forgotten.
Samantha Power crossed the desert with us into Darfur. She's investigated ethnic cleansing in Sudan, Rwanda, and Kosovo. She won a Pulitzer Prize for a book, A Problem from Hell.
So this is Darfur. A lot of people are coming down through this way, and a lot of people don't make it this far.
No, there are an untold number of Darfurians who are stuck. We encountered some of them as we drove eastward, and they said, if we had the means, we would get to Chad. Please tell people to send help.
The United Nations Security Council has, for the first time, voted to refer a case to the recently formed International Criminal Court in The Hague.
It could be many years before anybody responsible for the crimes in Darfur ends up in court. Yet today is a milestone.
This International Criminal Court ADAs, the law will help to control violence. And then we start this movement.
Right now, he's the nearest thing to hope for the people of Darfur. A soft-spoken lawyer, but on a mission of justice for those without a voice. He told the world how Sudanese officials had deliberately targeted civilians.
The fabric of society is destroyed. They attack and they rape, they kill, they bomb, and they force 2.5 million people into camps. I was thinking yesterday, what's your name? They are looking for a smoking gun. And a smoking gun is your man. This is the map. This is the map of the attacks. Let me put together. Boom. This is the impact. I know. You understand?
Yeah.
Good.
Ok, bonjour à tous. Hier, vous avez eu un problème en particulier. Le particulier, c'est que vous avez eu trop de gens pour avoir le temps de chercher dans le livre. Vous étiez...
Ça, c'est zone 6.
Vous étiez tout seul, peut-être d'entre nous. Le chef de bureau qui va nous aider à faire l'appel. C'est toi qui va appuyer un petit peu les points où on est applicable.
Ouais, d'accord. Oui, il y a de l'espace, allez.
We know that this crime will be committed again. We know that the only signal a potential perpetrator of today can take from history is that you can get away with it. And that was Lemkin's point, that you have to create the impression that perpetrators will be watched, that they will be accountable in some fashion. One of the things he used to say was that a line of blood ran from the Roman Empire to the present, right up to the Jews who live nearby. He was a Polish Jew who had been born near the town of Białystok. He had grown up in an area which kind of changed hands between the Poles and the Russians and the Germans, and kind of never knew who would be responsible for next year's pogrom. During the First World War, his family had been displaced from their homes. They'd hid out in the forest. So he had a great empathy, I think, born of himself having suffered dislocation. When Lemkin was 12 years old, he read a novel called Quo Vadis, which described the Roman Emperor Nero's extreme brutality inflicted against Christians and other minorities. He had always, as a boy, consumed historical details of what the French had done to the Huguenots, of what the Mongols had done to this minority. I mean, very unusual reading. Something about the pain of the people who were dying in carnage elsewhere registered with him in a deep and galvanizing way. Lemkin was studying linguistics at the University of Lvov when he began reading about the Armenian massacres, and he was both sickened and outraged. Turkish authorities had long pointed to Armenians as a Christian minority that refused to convert, and for a very long time the Turks had treated them as if they were potential subversives. Of course, at a time of war, the sense of who is with us and who is against us becomes more acute. And when World War I broke out, the Turkish authorities decided to herd the entire Armenian population into the desert. One of the people on the march was a man named Soghomon Tehlirian. He was with his family. He watched Turkish militia put an axe through the head of one of his siblings. His sister was killed, his mother was killed, he himself was knocked unconscious. When he woke up, he looked around and he realized that basically everybody he'd ever loved was gone. But later, after he actually made it to safekeeping, he decided to take matters into his own hands. In 1921, Tehlirian tracked down the Minister of the Interior, Talat, in Berlin, Germany. Talat having plotted the destruction of the Armenians, and on a wet spring day, went charging up to Talat, put a revolver to the back of his head and said, "This is to avenge the death of my family," and pulled the trigger. Tehlirian's defense was that Talat was responsible for the deaths of more than 1 million Armenians. You, the so-called international community, didn't do anything. It just can't be the case that over these centuries we have this recurrence of a pattern. Something clicked in him. He went to a law professor. He said, how can this be that the Turks could have just wiped out the Armenians and no one on the outside could have bothered him? And the professor said, well, you know, it's like when you own chickens. If you, Lemkin, come in and start to mess with me when I've got my chickens, you're trespassing. And Lemkin said, but surely human life is different than the life of chickens. And the professor kind of looked at him blankly and said, well, no. I am the sovereign of my farm, and the Turkish authorities were the sovereign in control of the Ottoman Empire, and they could do within the Ottoman Empire what they wanted. That you could, in a sense, legalize murder to Lemkin meant you needed to change your laws and what it meant to be sovereign. This epiphany in his early 20s led him to put linguistics aside, to focus on law, and to decide that he, Raphael Lemkin, will be the lawyer who invents the international law to ban the practice of destroying national, ethnic, or religious groups. He's gonna be the guy, says this 21-year-old.
All right, come around here. Yeah, you can get the world. See, you can have the world. It's kind of cracked, but That's the condition it's in. We'll have to patch it up a bit to make it work a little better than it is now. Okay, I don't know if you can get in here. The age of about 50, I set some goals for myself, perhaps a midlife crisis. I said, I'm not going to work for clients. I'm going to try to prevent the next Holocaust. Now, how does one little guy from Transylvania go about trying to reform the world? Honey, we'll get you more flies than, I don't know what, something else. I have a date with the lady from Greece now. I have to go find her. Okay. I give them kisses and wisdom. They take the kisses, the wisdom they leave for others. Okay, let me go get somebody else here. Australia, let's see. Did I give Australia one of these informative little booklets on the crime of aggression? No. Well, now you have it. China. That's the one I need.
Right, fine.
How are you?
Thank you. Fine, thank you.
Now, I'm going to give you, first of all, a symbol.
Thank you so much.
Made in USA.
Wow, really?
Not in China. I've given you one of these.
Oh, yeah.
You know, to create a global community on the law is complicated because they're far to have a common understanding of how to live in the world. That's why we are just such a primitive community. The global community is very primitive. So the work has to be based in organizations, institutions with a mandate and people following the mandate. And that was the vision of Lemkin.
Lemkin was a very successful lawyer at doing kind of conventional national law, but throughout, he moonlights trying to come up with the international framework to ban mass murder. He devours everything he can find on the field of international law, on how governments have come together in the past to prohibit international crimes like piracy or slavery. That they can't unite over the massacre of whole ethnic or religious groups. He said, that's crazy. He knew that even though he was presenting a radically novel international convention that would ban the mass murder of civilians, he had to do it in a way that would appeal to the self-interest of the nations that comprised the international system. The difficulty was that most governments wanted to be free to do what they wanted internally. In 1933, there was an international lawyers conference, and he thought, this is my chance. I will present at this conference my new convention banning the practice of what he then called barbarity. After his paper was read aloud, people just waved their arms and rolled their eyes and said, this crime that you, Lemkin, described takes place, quote, too seldom to legislate. Yes, it happened to the Armenians, but this is what Turks do. You know, it's what Muslims do. This is not something that Europeans would do. When Hitler invaded Poland in 1939, he did so on the heels of talking to his general staff, and as they said, well, can we get away with it? Can we get away with all of these plans you have? And Hitler said, but after all, who today still remembers the destruction of the Armenians. Lemkin knew what was coming. He warned others. When he got into the forest and was himself in hiding, he witnessed real carnage. People with whom he traveled, fled, were themselves killed, died of disease or starvation. Here is somebody who his whole life he's been reading these historical tales of deportation or mass slaughter, and he's living it. This tragedy only deepened for Lemkin when he went back to his own village, where his parents were along with his brother. He pleaded with them to join him in flight, pleaded with them to pay attention to his prophecy, to what he knew to be true. His parents said, "Look, Raphael, we're old. I mean, what are the Germans going to want with us? Why would they kill us? We won't have done anything to them." Of course, they and 47 other members of his family were herded up and sent to camps and killed. It's instinctively human when you're trapped to assume that the world will look out for you. The resiliency of that idea that Lemkin's family had, that generations of victims of mass atrocity have had, is belied again and again by the facts of history. When I graduated from college in 1992, I moved to Berlin and taught English there for about 6 months. And in Berlin at that time, there was this influx of refugees from the former Yugoslavia. They were all over the place. Camps and gymnasiums were taken over. I mean, it was really overwhelming to me, having never seen a flood of refugees before. And in the meantime, the images from Bosnia had emerged of the concentration camps. Some British journalists uncovered this horrifying footage from the former Yugoslavia of emaciated men behind barbed wire, women who'd been kept in rape camps over the course of the previous 6 months. Images that, if they weren't in color, one could easily have assumed came from a very different era. Seeing those images engendered in me a desire to face squarely what was happening, as squarely as I could within the limits of my low station in life, but to try to do something. And so I thought, well, I'd been a journalist in college, I'd been a sports reporter, therefore I should go and become a war correspondent. I ended up finding my own way over there. I was still probably 22. I was under no illusions that me showing up was somehow going to change the world, but I did have a sense that there was never going to be any other reason to do the right thing, other than that your heart kind of melted when you heard the story of what they were going through, because it just seemed like all the geopolitical interests cut against doing. The only thing that cut in favor of doing really was caring. The hardest period was the period in the summer of 1995. We did our part, and yet in that summer, it just felt like nothing we wrote was puncturing the bubble that policymakers were in.
The hatred between all three groups, the Bosnians and the Serbs and the Croatians, is almost unbelievable, and it's centuries old. That really is a problem from hell. And the United States simply doesn't have the means to make people in that region of the world like each other.
The narrative that it was a problem from hell, that we'd never make these people like one another, that they'd been fighting for centuries, that narrative had taken potent hold. If you just say, well, they're at it again, then it's not surprising that a massacre in a village doesn't kind of leap off the page. We got word that the Serbs were closing in on this so-called UN safe area, Srebrenica. One night, got a call from the UN intelligence people telling us that the Serbs were now within striking distance of the city center. And it was like, striking distance of the city center. At that point, I reached out to my editor and said, my gosh, we've got to cover this. I mean, I was breathless. But to the editor's ear, it was just another attack. And yeah, there's more suffering, but why was this suffering different from other suffering? So I failed to convince my editor to put a story in the newspaper, and the next day, when the story didn't run, was the day the Serbs just marched into the center. The UN troops kind of melted away, and Ratko Mladic, who's the leading Bosnian Serb general, but also leading war crime suspect at that time, was the person barking orders at Dutch peacekeepers who seemed very compliant.
Koliko ti je godina? Kako ti ime? Molim vas, budite veoma strpljivi. Samo malo. Bez panike i propustite malu djecu i žene. Nemojte da se neko dijete izgubi. Ne bojte se ništa, niko vam neće ništa uraditi.
We watched a lot of this on CNN. There was Mladic, this notorious killer who was patting the heads of young children, passing out candy. And yet you're also seeing this historically resonant separation of individuals. He put older women to one side, attractive younger women were brought into Serb custody, and any man basically between the age of 15 and as late as early 70s was put on a bus and driven off. It was as if somehow the international community expected someone who's about to commit an act of genocide to say, oh, I'm about to commit an act of genocide. Surely he couldn't have executed. Why would he do that? It just seemed so. He had them. The town was his. Why would he kill every last man and boy? It was every man and boy systematically exterminated, while a group of journalists were, an hour and a half drive away, but couldn't get to them. While Western satellites were taking images and gathering intelligence overhead. I mean, all kinds of possibilities to get real-time knowledge about the fate of the men and boys. I think the thing that I found the hardest was interacting with local people who were convinced that if the outside world only knew, it would be enough to galvanize a response. But by the end of my time there, you get doors slammed in your face, and you're just a reminder of a world that raises our hopes and then dashes them. In the end, I felt I didn't know enough. I thought if I went to law school, maybe I could become a prosecutor at The Hague, that I could be part of the effort to punish these war criminals who had so much blood on their hands. I mean, it just was so clear as General Mladic patted the heads of these kids, he just felt completely immune, that he would never be held accountable, that he could do whatever he wanted.
Može se reći da se odmorio. Danas jedno možda 40 puta smo se spustili sa ovim momcima i bilo je pravo zadovoljstvo.
Assalamu alaikum.
Najini tiro, ina tiro, garga tiro najini. Arkam tiri charo, mabawa bertanya. Yesu musa tude tu bata sere zira obra tude kata te okai sere di. Ime so erdi baru sita na tali mina bagadi. Hai tiro. Oh mujur na tala.
Qu'est-ce qui te reste?
Juste le chargement, les manutentions, les choses, les quantités.
Ça, c'est seulement. Oui. C'est vraiment de minime quantité.
Oui, c'est rien.
أنا ما بحث عن جنين مثلا أنا وأصبرك زايدي. أنا أعرف إن الكلام جونا هذا ولا يقدرون. إن شاء الله تنير وفاصل نيجي. عادي بس كسبون. يجي أوبرا أسكر أبوارته آخر كورنك. أنا نيجي جين كيسة قدر بس كي جاي كورنك. آخر أنا واجر أنا كذي. 3 سنة و8 10 شهور يرو 4 إلا سنتين بس إذا داروا طول يدي هرسك قداي.
When you've gone through this kind of imposed criminality, you feel that you have been forsaken by everyone. I can understand. I can understand. This is why I'm giving part of myself to do probably what I didn't do for my people who died. You have to fix this kind of torn tissue.
Lemkin traveled 14,000 miles and landed in the United States in 1941. He said at one point that there were 3 things he always wanted to avoid in his life: to go bald, to wear eyeglasses, and to become a refugee. He was not at all comfortable being dependent on handouts, dependent on other people's kindnesses, asking favors of people. When he arrived in the States, the Americans were not yet in the war. President Roosevelt was inclined to stop Hitler, saw Hitler as a threat, but very reluctant to make the war into a war about saving the Jews.
You feel this guilt on your heart. You would have done much more to save them. And this is this kind of experience you live with. You cannot explain to someone. Sometimes it's even, you feel even ashamed that you didn't do anything. But actually you could not do anything because the negative forces were strong. But you never have this quietness of your spirit, of your heart. The human nature keeps on telling you you should have done much more.
The sense that he had of having failed his neighbors, failed his family, failed his community, and the idea that you could just be patient while that kind of mass slaughter was going on, that was just anathema for him. He harnessed this pain and he put tremendous thought into what it is the U.S. government should be doing in order to stop the extermination of the Jews. What that provoked in him was this idea, maybe if I had a better word, if I'd had a better name, then, maybe then, if the crime has a name, governments will see how qualitatively and quantitatively different it is, and maybe then they'll band together to do what they should do. Lemkin's notebooks from that period forward are filled with efforts to come up with a word, a new word, to capture the crime that he'd been committed to banning his entire adult life, but in a way that would cast an instant stigma on anybody committing this crime. But in the end, what he settles on is a Greek-Latin hybrid, genos, people, tribe, race, with the Latin sedere, side, for killing or destroying. You see it in the notebooks, him kind of trying different things out and then settling upon this word which he thinks can in fact connote that moral judgment that he feels is necessary. So he has a word. Now what? What do you do with a word?
Where's my wife? I lost my wife. Gertrude, where are you? Come here.
Oh yeah, that's the family picture.
That's my family when we came to America. This is a picture of some refugees.
That was about a year after we got back.
Mm-hmm. I say behind every good man there's a good woman. You know how I know that? She told me.
And you know, it's true. I am a good woman. He doesn't know, but I know.
Oh, I stayed with her all these years, you know.
But nobody else would have stayed with her.
Putting up with me is a full-time job.
That's true.
Really?
Not physically, just emotionally. He's a good guy.
No, she believes in what I do, otherwise she wouldn't
I
put up with
certainly
it.
do. I absolutely do.
I've been thinking about criminal responsibility all of my life. I was raised in Hell's Kitchen in New York, which was a high-density crime area. I had decided early that I wanted to be on the side of the law. I seemed to have certain talents in that direction. In due course, I won a scholarship to the Harvard Law School, but then it was interrupted by the war. I think I was probably the worst soldier in the U.S. Army. I was rotten when it came to digging a foxhole, and I was an independent soldier, and I was trained to think. Nevertheless, I fought in every major campaign, from the beaches of Normandy to the final Battle of the Bulge. I saw war firsthand, and my final assignment in the U.S. Army during the war was to go into the concentration camps as they were being liberated and to collect the evidence for war crimes trials. The U.S. Army knew nothing about crimes against humanity or major war crimes of the type we were encountering. It was a madhouse. I saw the crematoria with the bodies still in them. The troops are coming in, the SS is trying to flee. The inmates are catching the guards, they're beating them to death, burning them alive. Heads blown off all along the way. Every conceivable disease, lice, dysentery, cholera. The object was to get in, get the evidence, and get out, and move on to the next camp. All of that I have seen. And when the war was over, I had no intention of going back to Germany, never. But since I had experience as a war crimes investigator, I was recruited by the Army to go back to assist in the Nuremberg trials. We had millions of Nazi Party files underground, and one of my researchers came upon a series of reports from the Eastern Front in which certain German units called Einsatzgruppen. Nobody knew how to translate Einsatzgruppen. The word Einsatz means action. Gruppen is groups. And these so-called action groups were in fact murder squads. Their assignment was to kill every single Jewish man, woman, and child they could lay their hands on, and anybody else who might be perceived as a potential enemy of the Reich. That was their job. Go behind the lines and kill them all. Shoot them down, drop them into a ditch, and dump them like garbage. And then every day send in a report to Berlin, what a good job you did. I had totaled up all of those reports. When I reached over 1 million killed, I said, that's enough. I said, General Taylor, we got to put on another trial. And he said, look, can you do it in addition to your other work? And I said, sure. He said, okay, you're it. So I became the chief prosecutor for the United States in what was certainly the biggest murder trial in human history.
We ask this court to affirm by international penal action man's right to live in peace and dignity, regardless of his race or creed. The case we present is a plea of humanity to law.
Where did Group D operate?
Gruppe D operierte in der südlichen Ukraine.
Do you know how many persons were liquidated under your direction?
Vom Juli 1941 bis Juni 1942 sind von den Einsatzkommandos etwa 90.000 als liquidiert gemeldet worden.
This was the tragic fulfillment of a program of intolerance and arrogance.
I accused 22 defendants of murdering over 1 million people in cold blood, including women, men, children. This was only a small sampling. 3,000 men were killing Jews every day for 2 years, 24 hours a day. Why did we try only 22? There were only 22 seats in the dock. That's the truth. Nobody had more than 22 seats in any Nuremberg trial. And this was a small sampling of the highest ranking people that I could find and the best educated. It's a leadership crime. I didn't want to take the enlisted men who were just carrying out orders. These were all doctor degrees, double doctor degrees. We can't try everybody who's guilty of wrongdoing. All we can do is try to deter the crimes by pointing out how disgraceful it is. While I was at Nuremberg, preparing to do the research for prosecuting, there was one fella by the name of Raphael Lemkin. He had no real official status. He seemed to be a guy just hanging around. He was usually rather unkempt, in shirts that didn't get washed very often, and a suit which was rather worn and down on his uppers. I was sorry for him.
Lemkin was heartbroken after the war. He couldn't find members of his family. He knew his parents had been killed. And he decided, having come up with this new concept of genocide, that he would go to the place where law and the horror of what had just happened in the Second World War converged, and that was Nuremberg. Young lawyers, old lawyers, trying to figure out how to prosecute the most horrific crimes ever recorded, and he was going up to them and trying to buttonhole them in order to make genocide one of the crimes that they prosecuted.
We had a statute which said what crimes were within the jurisdiction of the court, and it didn't say a word about genocide. But when I was drawing up the indictment, I charged them with crimes against humanity and war crimes. That was within the statute. But in my opening statement, I said what happened here was genocide.
The killing of defenseless civilians during a war may be a war crime, but the same killings are part of another crime, a graver one, if you will, genocide.
And that, of course, was a tribute to Lemkin.
Lemkin learned very quickly that you can't build international law overnight. You can't create a new crime overnight. He was horrified to realize that genocide was not one of the 4 crimes that were being prosecuted. The crimes that were being prosecuted were a crime against peace, crimes against humanity, but crucially, crimes against humanity had to be linked to the crime of peace. So if all Hitler had done would have been to have killed all the Jews of Germany, technically he would not have committed a crime against humanity that would have been covered by Nuremberg, because he wouldn't have crossed an international border. He thought that the only thing that could change was not the motivation of the perpetrator, but the will of the bystanders. It's the question of whether anybody would get in the way of those impulses, because the impulses would always be there. The desire to hoard resources, the fear of the other, the conviction that the other was coming to get something dear and precious to you, and thus the need to wipe out the other. He just saw it again and again like clockwork.
The numbers are still rising of people driven from their villages by the Arab militias, the Janjaweed, or who have fled from them in fear. Almost 2 million in Darfur, with another 200,000 in Chad.
Working in Eastern Chad is not easy. Armed people are going and coming, and the banditry acts.
Violence has killed some 12 relief workers since May, and essentially we're seeing a downward spiral in the situation.
It's tough for us because a lot of our work is done on the ground, at the camps.
Je demande à Bougui va te déposer à toi. Ok, merci.
Today in Eastern Chad we are on phase 4, and phase 4 is only followed by phase 5, which is evacuation for UN.
Essaie de tourner vers les gendarmes. Si toi, même au niveau des camps, des fois, on en avait besoin.
As the war drags on, as the atrocities continue, the Sudanese have gotten a signal from the outside world that they're immune, that they'll be fine, that there'll be a lot of hand-wringing, but that basically they can do what they want. That speaks to Lemkin's idea that the international community signals, go ahead and exterminate whoever you want as long as it's within your borders. What matters to us is that you don't invade anybody else. And this was crushing to him. So he decided that since Nuremberg had failed him, he had to find some other way to get his crime anointed.
Unfortunately, Nuremberg court punished on the crimes committed in connection with war. So as far as genocide committed in time of peace, strange as it might seem, it was still a lawful thing. And therefore I said to myself, now being a lawyer, I'm going to do something about it.
The United Nations is and will remain the most powerful existing force for peace and against war in the world today.
We shouldn't forget that it was a total disregard of elementary human rights and the unhappy destruction of most of the basic human freedoms which the recent war brought upon all of us.
We need deeds, not words. Show us the deeds. Give us proof of good faith. Let us deal with the deadly weapons. Let's open our countries to inspection, all of us. Let's open up the world and let light and knowledge come in and see what each other's doing.
Lemkin went back to the books, as it were. He went back to what he had tried to do, which is to ensure that a legal convention was put in place in order to ban genocide. The first step that he took in order to see the crime prohibited was to try to get countries in the brand new United Nations to just pass a resolution.
Lemkin found something that is still valid. The idea small countries can play together and define limits.
Amazingly, he secured the passage of a genocide resolution, which in turn paved the way for the creation of a convention. The next task became get enough countries to ratify the convention to create the first ever piece of international human rights law. Lemkin turned himself into a one-man lobbying machine. He would park himself outside the ambassadors' residences. He would certainly park himself outside their offices at the new UN. He would badger journalists. In the days where he was relentlessly pursuing passage of the resolution and then ratification of the convention, he was really letting himself go. Sleep, health, food kind of melted into the background.
It's sad. A man has lost his whole family and is desperate and he doesn't know what to do. He reaches out for a concept, an idea, and anybody who will listen, like the Ancient Mariner. It's the Ancient Mariner. He's stopping. You got to hear my story.
He was described by some as a kind of hermit crab lurking in the halls of the UN.
He was disheveled. He looked a little bit like he didn't have a wife to take care of him. His shirts were sort of wrinkled around, but he was, you know, a rather pathetic figure, really, but a very determined one.
He pivoted from what had been done to his people to what had been done in historical cases of mass slaughter, always taking advantage of the specific cases within particular countries in order to motivate particular ambassadors. He tailored his lobbying in a masterful way. Just as you were about to kind of write Lemkin off as a wild-eyed fanatic, he would impress you with his command of the diplomatic arena, with his command of the politics, with his connections, and with the earnestness and sincerity of the cause. One by one, he managed to build this coalition. And he later described just sitting there beaming as country after country just said yes, 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 you know, each raising their hand, agreeing to sign on to this convention.
No votes against the convention, so the convention is adopted by this assembly by unanimous vote.
It marks the commencement of a most important epoch in the work of the United Nations.
And the document was delivered. Good news went out to the world.
July 1st, 2002, the only permanent criminal tribunal set up to try genocide, crimes against humanity and war crimes came into force.
100 countries are signatories. All of these states have agreed to subject themselves to the court's jurisdiction. The court prosecutes individuals charged with the most serious offences, but it can only deal with crimes committed after 2002.
When you are in Boston, you are confirming the law. In Amsterdam, you are confirming the law. In the international world, you are establishing the law. It's a process. It took 50 years to move from Lemkin idea to implementation of ICC. It took 50 years. We had to identify why each group was attacked. Okay, these are the attacks against the Fur, these are attacks against Sagagwa,
Do you
against
want
Masali.
all of these to be contained in one map?
No, three.
In three separate maps?
Three separate maps, three separate annexes.
Every attack you can click on and bring up at least a witness statement. What is this?
So the grey parts show the destroyed area, whereas the very black parts show that that place is still intact.
It's Masalit area. One of the things we have to prove is the targeting of the full Sagagwa Masalit. We have map showing where this belief and what village were attacked.
We have plotted on this map about 309 attacks on villages in Darfur.
I counted here village abandoned, and the number is 100.
Hello? Basically what will happen is on the 14th I will present to the judges an application requesting the arrest warrant against al-Bashir for genocide.
التحية لهم ولشهدائهم الأبرار الذين ارتوت الأرض بدمائهم فأنبتت الزرع والزهر والطلع والبترول.
We are proving Bashir has absolute control of his forces. He is the president of the country, the head of the National Congress Party, the commander-in-chief of the army. And also we have evidence showing how we report to him directly, including militia and Janjaweed leader he included in the reserve forces. So we prove the control he has. It's interesting, he keep attacking people in full sight of the international community, in full sight of the Security Council. He managed that the international community has different interests, can different to work together, and in some way he forced the denial of everyone. And people are being killed today, so he does not care. We cannot deny the government is obviously having a policy targeting these people. And they are doing this inside the international community. Okay, it's not your role to say it's genocide, but it's my role. I have to do it. From the beginning I say, I will prosecute those who bear the greater responsibility. The law defines what is right or wrong in a global community. So it's not just about punishing al-Bashir. It's about, can someone with power commit genocide because has power?
Unlike the UN, the ICC has no police force. With no one to track down and arrest suspects, it relies on cooperation and political backing. But key countries have not ratified it. They include Israel, China, India, Pakistan, most Arab states, and, most importantly, the United States, which has argued it wants to protect its soldiers serving abroad from frivolous cases.
When I was appointed, a friend of mine told me, refuse the position because without US support, you cannot investigate, you cannot arrest people. So for me, it was a good advice because it was saying basically I had to ignore US and I had to organize things differently. In some way, I'm used to it because in Argentina, I learned a lot how to investigate against power, how to investigate against the wind, how to sail against the winds. So I see the level of conflict I had to face alone normally train me to the job.
Señores jueces, cada uno de los hechos que estamos narrando merecería ser contado en sus detalles para poder apreciar lo que cada uno de esos hechos significó.
I think the junta trial was the first time when I had to face people who was against me. The elite in my country was in favor of the military dictatorship, so I had to face my family. My mother loved General Videla. I had two uncles who were colonels. So my family on my mother's side was military. In fact, my uncle Bubi went to see General Videla and said, look, General, it's a shame, but Moreno Campo is my nephew, and I can do nothing to stop him. So the only thing I can do is promise you, I will never talk to him again. Never. And he fulfilled his promise.
No vamos a tolerar que la muerte ande suelta en la Argentina.
And then that's why I started to be training that idea. Some people hate you, some people support you, and you have to ignore both. Just be impartial and keep doing your job. It's the only way to fulfill my mission. Military dictatorship killed about 20,000 probably, but kidnapped more than 50,000. It was not a genocide. The numbers are different, but we're still paying the consequence, so it's a catastrophe.
La ferocidad y la mentira son las dos notas del sistema de represión. Por eso hoy se hace necesario averiguar la verdad y juzgar a todos los que hayan violado la ley, en particular a los poderosos, a los máximos responsables.
The generals explained to us, look, this was a war. We saved the country. And you pretend we are committing crimes. It's insane. So that was their mentality. In some way, I could understand them. The feeling of loyalty, the feeling of honor. I know them. And also, I was same age of the students who were killed. So I feel I can belong to both groups, but also I believe in the law. And so for me, it's just, guys, this is the law, I have to respect the law. The law is the difference between life or death. I had the privilege to be the prosecutor in the junta trials. I cannot fail, we cannot fail. If we fail to prove the case, the military will say, okay, we are innocent. And the Argentina will lose order and memory. The trial with order, give clarity. But also the trials show respect for the victims, because we are transforming their stories into evidence.
Misha matar kiri bi aska oni ajo gagada no korni ajo kollo fulo o amunero de taniro bataniro e ko siru jawa siniro no koniro weniro kiri banaji kusanga ana osrara igrevi o wale shindi no yana kasaga ni kala tawna tawde westen kale kan libertad daw kinina kinina awa abo setrere to awa te bere to nam jegi joru tanga bere oro sukuri miskin sa umri januri فما خشت قوات ده صلت نمشي وين انما عمر بقتلنا
15th February 2004, soldiers in Janjaweed attacked. Witnesses saw soldiers crush small children with their horses, boys tied by the neck and dragged behind running horses until they died. There was another one, 15th February, village attacked and destroyed. Wells were probably poisoned. They smelled like DDT. And saw 7 girls, aged 8 to 9, raped, many unconscious after the attack. So these are some.
Yeah, but I understand the concerns, but I'm not bombing the schools. I'm not killing the peacekeepers, so I'm not doing the crimes. I'm just saying, guys, this is a crime, stop the crimes. And he bombed the schools in May. He killed people now. So, and also, he's confessing in TV, and he was publicly saying, yes, I get instructions, so what? Okay, I'm the prosecutor, I have to say, okay, so what? You are the criminal now. This is the fault of the Sudanese. They refuse to engage, they pretend they ignore, and they publicly say, Bashir gave instructions. So what they can do? So they have to stop the stupid threatening to us, they have to behave. They have to behave. Not
young lady. Still got a seat left for us. In the back, behind this, behind the rope.
Yeah, unfortunately, behind the rope.
The Security Council agrees to extend an invitation to Mr. Luis Moreno Ocampo, prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. Welcome, Mr. Ocampo. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President and Excellencies. Mr. President, the Council decided to refer the situation in Darfur to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, thinking of the Darfuris, but remembering Rwanda and Srebrenica. You sent a concrete message. There can be no impunity for perpetrators of massive atrocities in Darfur. The evidence shows over a period of 5 years, an organized campaign by Sudanese officials to attack civilians. In Darfur today, girls are still being raped. Children die as their schools are bombed. There is no military justification for bombing schools, no legal excuse for raping women. Those are simply criminal acts against unarmed civilians. Their own state is attacking them. If the international community does not protect the Darfuris, they will be eliminated. I will proceed to the judges and present my evidence on who are those most responsible for the crimes described. Silence has never helped or protected victims. Silence, it only helps the criminals. Thank you.
When we talk about intervention or what the response to genocide or mass atrocity should be, there are a range of tools in the toolbox, a range of forms of involvement that one can take. But what's really disturbing is that we tend not even to open up the toolbox of tools and just to kind of say, well, it's not in our national interest, therefore someone else will take care of it. It's as if some of the lessons of the Holocaust were sort of stopped both at the water's edge and in the year 1945.
The Rwandan genocide is commonly known as having taken 1 million of people in 100 days. Such killings of human beings by human beings breaks the human confidence in itself. You question your being as human being. As long as you have such feeling, you are disconnected, if I can say. You are disconnected to life. Basokuru turahageze rero. Urabeho? Ntabwo tuhagera. Dore. Yes. You know, once you become a survivor of that situation, you think you would better rely on yourself.
Abo, witonde sha yo sima igomba kuba ishaje. Ubwo zikuri hejuru y'imva ariko.
This is a kind of situation where you cannot, when you don't understand what is going on. And then you start questioning yourself. Then you lose confidence in yourself.
In Rwanda, up to 200,000 people have died in a month of civil war and tribal massacres.
Majority Hutus killing the hated and once economically dominant Tutsis.
Yeah. The problem of ethnicity in Rwanda was something which was encouraged by the government. I remember when I was at school, I was at the same time identified as Rwandan and Tutsi. It was a discriminatory system. It was something which was very clear, which was very organized.
Massacres continue in the Central African nation of Rwanda. Rwanda fell into anarchy after its president was killed in a suspicious plane crash early this month.
The genocide was planned. They knew who was to be killed.
It has been an extremely violent day, a witch hunt in which various politicians have been murdered and members of the minority Tutsi tribe have also been murdered.
It's not very easy to kill 10,000 people in a day using only machetes. It shows how people were active.
The Western governments who had in their daily intelligence briefs detailed information about what was going down in Rwanda, who even if they never opened their intelligence briefs could read in the New York Times and the Washington Post every day, already after 2 weeks that more than 200,000 people had been killed, just sat there and just watched a faster killing spree than even the Nazis had mustered.
We were all of us afraid. We would not know what was going to happen. I told my wife, now we have to run away. We ran until the stadium. The Radio Mille Collines was broadcasting that all the cockroaches stay at Amahoro Stadium. They knew that we were there. Cockroach is a term that was used to mean the Tutsis. At Amahoro, UN ensures security.
The UN is planning the deployment of the extra 5,000 troops it's expecting. There's still no certainty about when or even if these troops will arrive.
General, so when are the extra troops going to arrive?
Last week.
Will you send troops?
Well, what more do you want me to say? I'm waiting here. So send me troops.
General Dallaire, seeing the bodies pile up around him, a soldier, getting call after call from Western capitals and other capitals saying, we want our troops to come home.
I am waiting for New York to what it's been able to do with all these sovereign countries and the decisions are happening there. The UN does not have dedicated troops, and so sovereign states take the decisions.
He did receive a call from an American officer, and he begged. He just said, come, why don't you come and help reinforce this flimsy force I have, and the officer on the other line said, we've run the numbers here, and we've decided that one American life is worth about 80,000 Rwandan lives.
In a late-night Thursday vote, the UN Security Council voted to drastically scale back its peacekeeping force in the Central African country. The council reduced the troops there from 1,700 to 270.
The UN stands condemned for pulling out of Rwanda as the fighting started, leaving the country in the hands of killers wielding machetes.
What surprised us the most is that it's during the killings that they decided pulling out. And it was very bad. People were fleeing from the town of Kigali to go to Butare to seek refuge. Butare, they only started killing after the speech that was made by the interim president. And the speech was only about the people who didn't dare start killing, who have fear of killing.
Tuzabakira rwose bari abatutsi ubwo bagiye bakiga imbunda bazatumara. Tuzibwire ko twazibwiye ko tuzazirwanya tukazitsinda.
I remember when it started, they even had to bring some of the militia members to help the population start killing. It's like launching the killings of the people in Butare.
Mugomba no kumenya kwirwanaho. Niyo mpamvu twasabye ko abaturage batozwe ibya gisirikare bagashirika ubwoba. Ntabwo imbunda ari umusirikare gusa. Umuntu arashobora kugira imbunda ye. Barasa nawe ukabarasa kuba ufite yawe. Nanjye mba nyifite. Buri gihe. Ngiye.
My family was in Butare. It was a big family, made of 6 sisters. One of them was married. She had 2 kids and her husband, and 5 young girls. One at secondary school, the others were still at the primary school, and my father and my mother. And then I have my aunts, my uncles, and my grandparents. They all died in Butare. My parents were killed in April, but my sisters were killed around June. They were raped during the whole period of the genocide before they killed them. My dad was hacked to death. They buried him, they left his head outside, he was eaten by dogs. When I learned everything else, it went beyond me. Yeah. It's not acceptable, Edith. It's not acceptable. You cannot believe, you cannot believe, you cannot accept being told your mother was naked when they found her dead body. It's not acceptable to be told that your father was buried and his head out and eaten by dogs. No. It's complicated.
Or a view as to whether or not what is happening could be genocide?
Well, as I think you know, the use of the term genocide has a very precise legal meaning, although it's not strictly a legal determination. There are other factors in there as well. When in looking at a situation to make a determination about that, before we begin to use that term.
Curiosity, given that so many people say that there is genocide underway or something that strongly resembles it, why wouldn't this convention be
Well,
involved?
I think, as you know, this becomes a legal definitional thing, unfortunately, in terms of as horrendous as all these things are, there becomes a definitional question.
In the end, the only thing that stopped the killing was Tutsi rebel soldiers who took their fates into their own hands. It was this recognition that if we don't act, nobody will. And one does really wonder if they had trusted international promises and negotiations and deliberations, whether or not there'd be any Tutsi left at all. What you see in case after case after case among victims is a sense that the best way to guard against the recurrence of these crimes is to take up arms yourself.
It happened to the Armenians, and after the Armenians got a very rough deal at the Versailles Conference because the criminals who were guilty of genocide were not punished, you know that they have organized a terroristic organization, which took justice in our own hands. I thought that a crime should not be punished by the victims, but should be punished by a court, by international law.
والله يوكي جنيت الدنا اللي دنا جويرتلي ما عرفت من عمود التاريخ قبل شهرين كي عايزين تتذكر أنا عشان نتمن ونرجع ما يشاركي
كاغ صورداس كيا كلا كاغ صورداس كيا كلا أنا كي بس أنت على إنه هنا كاغ بسوا كبسي أنت كويري ما أكبر كنا كلنا no ko guru nugi ma sa jawo sna te ja sen kira ka rara ya da ko ga de to bari sene tai te ga ta ga eros akal sawas arnon turi bas usokko umna barsila da tu por tiri so ku saro takwa kuigi wo mer ti iko sirga ta ku ni dara ta ku kira ti an de ga bura sha da ge sando tako
وعلى حسب ودي قلنا يعني سيادة دنا رأوي ويلي ماما تيرا عمره دي 8 سنين وياسين جاي عمره 17 سنة حركة يقولها بلي يلي توكنا سه ما مثل إمسا ياسين جالسة ويا يلوجي وستي حركة لا إلي كودي عمره أكلي يعني إلي كودي ويا إني مثلا هاي أني كاي لازم ياسين يكسر وكل الدنيا ما كده كله أجلس وقع جيوني لسه كسر برا ياسين كله نيجا كيدو كله نو بيتار تجيب تسيبني
ini mau oh kerja mana jiran nue oh serana kena nak mana lira ini nue nege beri mau beri anda jinung kaya lo
kudu ne jayar uguji kada tintu mina nuari banage Oh no, okay, that's really job. Charge no aje. Makere au ni dero. Kere, ide guru. Bara na dere.
Getting the Genocide Convention passed was just the first of many political battles Lemkin would have to fight. There were governments that didn't want to interfere in the internal affairs of sovereign states, but also this kind of convention would curb governments' relationship with their own citizens. While Lemkin was waging this crusade, he met skepticism from all sides. The journalists of the New York Times, who Lemkin had badgered for years, said, Lemkin, come on, you okay, congrats, you got the law passed, but I mean, is it really gonna make any difference? And Lemkin said, only man has law. We must build the law. Lemkin understood that the most important country in terms of enforcement would be the United States. For the United States to turn its back on the convention, it would render it nothing more, in fact, than a piece of paper with a lot of small governments' well wishes upon it, but not with the engine of global diplomacy behind it. You had Lemkin testifying or meeting with members of Congress and them saying, who are you to talk to us about what we should be doing, you with your broken English? What business is it of yours to be telling us what we should be putting in our law books? So of course, his point is, it's precisely, that's what we mean by a crime against humanity. It is a crime that affects all of us. It's precisely your business when this number of people are targeted for destruction. Lemkin was so exasperated because he was pushing water uphill. He realized that the system won't lie. The system is predicated on national interests, and that's what it will observe. There were a lot of people who said, Lemkin, you're more naive than any of us thought if you think that one piece of paper is going to change the nature of states.
From the BBC.
Hello.
Is it possible to ask you whether you think there's going to be any last-minute blockages that might stop your case going to the judges today? No, absolutely not. Okay.
Can you comment? Mr. Ocampo, you're live on BBC. When I collect the evidence enough to present the case against President Bashir, I knew there was no state supporting me. But if I do nothing, I don't bother others, but I fail in my mission. So I had no options. I had to do my case, knowing that it would be alone.
Well, for all the desire to see justice done, there are many out there, including within the UN itself, who feel that this is a bad idea. They fear retaliation and retribution. They worry about it stoking further conflict in Darfur. In other words, those twin objectives of peace and justice in Darfur may turn out to be completely incompatible.
The chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court is expected to ask the court to issue arrest warrants against Omar al-Bashir and other senior Sudanese officials.
He scheduled a news conference in The Hague. U.S. officials, meantime, are appealing for calm, clearly worried about a backlash after this coming Monday's announcement.
Moreno Ocampo is a determined man. This is a man who's got a bit of a habit of taking on the rich and powerful. In his youth in Argentina, he took on the military elite and he brought several members to trial. But this time, he's really got his work cut out.
The court doesn't have a police force that it will send out to Sudan to arrest President Bashir. There is almost no enforcement mechanism. Instead, there will be a question amongst members of the UN Security Council about what steps they take next and what changes on the ground in Sudan.
I just submit an application requesting an arrest warrant against Omar Hassan Ahmad al-Bashir for genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. The judges will assess the evidence. They will decide. If the judges issue an arrest warrant and the Sudanese government reject to implement the measure, then Security Council has to analyze how to ensure compliance with the court decision. What happened in Darfur is the consequence of al-Bashir will. We don't need to wait. We don't need to wait that he finish his work. These people are waiting for our protection. Thank you very much.
The pending ICC indictment against Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir has raised fears of a violent backlash against aid workers and peacekeepers in Darfur.
The UN gave orders to pull out all non-essential staff.
Sudan's ambassador to the UN told CNN the charges demonstrate Moreno Ocampo's professional and legal bankruptcy.
مش عقوبات مجلس الأمن. لو جيشت الجيوش وقفت على باب الخرطوم الآن كويس عشان أسلم مواطن ما حسلم مواطن وعشان كده الشعب السوداني عايز البشير.
Mr. Moreno Ocampo, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.
What do you say to people who accuse the ICC of being an active impediment to peace?
The decision to investigate the case was taken by the Security Council. It's not my decision to investigate the case.
Do you seriously expect him to be arrested and brought to The Hague?
My responsibility here is to the judicial part.
Many say it's a nice gesture, but it will never happen.
The world is talking about never again. It's time to put in practice.
I wonder if you think that the ultimate success of a court case like this will actually rest with Russia and China because of the power they wield within the United Nations.
I wonder if you feel you've failed the countless victims whose very rights this court was set up to protect.
What difference is it going to make? Who's going to arrest him?
Do you realistically believe President al-Bashir will be brought to The Hague?
You realistically believe we can ignore a genocide?
I don't disagree with the justness of your work, but I don't understand how it has a practical effect in Sudan.
4 years of searching for evidence of atrocities in Darfur, the prosecutor now finds himself on trial. He's forced to defend a legal action which the Security Council right here asked him to carry out, but now seems reluctant to support.
The International Criminal Court has filed genocide charges against the president of Sudan. The country's information minister said that Sudan does not recognize the International Criminal Court and refuses to obey any decision or order it issues.
We are going to ignore it fully. For us, ICC doesn't exist.
In the past, Interpol has issued so-called red notices for fugitives wanted by the court. That means they should be arrested anytime they attempt to cross an international border.
Sudan's President Omar al-Bashir, currently wanted on charges of genocide, has received a red carpet welcome in China. Bashir and the Chinese president, Hu Jintao, signed agreements to further develop economic ties. China is already the biggest buyer of Sudanese oil.
What Bashir has been doing is writing a textbook for defiance of the Security Council. Now the question is what will be the next chapter in that textbook and whether or not the Security Council is willing to assume its responsibility.
Mr. President, there is no information to believe that the crimes against humanity and genocide have stopped. Those who bear the greater responsibility have been indicted. The current challenge is their arrest. Council members have to reconcile their national interests with their responsibilities for peace and security. To execute the arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court, the victims will receive a message. They are not ignored. And the perpetrators will receive a different, clear message. There will be no impunity. Thank you very much, President.
I thank Prosecutor Moreno Ocampo for his briefing.
摩洛哥代表的发言，我下面请美国代表发言。
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the prosecutor's 15th report to the Security Council on the situation in Darfur. We call on the international community to ensure that the cycle of violence comes at last to a close. Thank you, Mr. President.
احنا ما عايزين اي حشرة ما عايزين اي حشرة في النيل الازرق ما عايزين اي حشرة في جبال النوبة عايزين ان شاء الله قبل بداية الخريف عبد الرحيم يدينا التمام انه ارض السودان خالية من اي حشرة سامة ان شاء الله.
People are very scared. Obviously there's fighting going on, but that's not the main issue. People are being hunted down for their ethnicity.
One of the things Lemkin said was, this convention is like a ship carrying survivors. It cannot be allowed to sink. And yet, Lemkin had to watch this ship that he had built kind of plank by plank sink into the muck of politics.
He was not defending one community. He was trying to defend the world, and it's difficult. The idea to defend universal values in the universe, that is complicated.
Lemkin's health by the early 1950s was very frail, living off half sandwiches that people had given him, not sleeping at all as he wrote these letters. His entire soul was invested in this cause.
Once you survived, either you become desperate. You say life is not worth being lived. Or you say, I have to succeed. And once you've determined to do that, you continue working. It's like a sickness. You cannot avoid it. It comes in you like that. It becomes your life. I mean, you smile, but something in you is dead.
The guy has a strategy so clear. He had a vision. And interestingly, he died ignored, no? He died ignored, no one cared about him. He died with a feeling of frustration.
Lemkin died in 1959. He was standing at a bus stop waiting for a bus to take him to the United Nations for yet another meeting. He was still trying to get other countries to live up to their promise, to live up to the commitment. He wasn't living with anybody, so it took time for someone to come and identify his body. A funeral was held for him, but fewer than a dozen people turned up to mourn his loss. The man who tried to prevent genocide and who had done so much for so many died almost as anonymously as his own parents did. I have a photo of Lemkin in my office at the National Security Council. Sometimes I look over at him and think the crimes that motivated him are still motivating people all these years later. It's chastening in some ways to realize how long it takes to build the kind of bureaucratic structures and to put in place the kinds of concrete policy tools that he was advocating, more than 60 years ago. Every day, Syrians are dying by artillery, by air power, by Scuds. This monstrous conflict has to come to an end.
No solution has ever been found by retaliating. I don't think of revenging myself. I'm capable of doing it. I can be capable of doing it. But if you are perpetrating hatred, it means you are exposing your children. You are exposing the children of your children. You see, it's kind of a spiral killing which is going to go on and on and on, and we never finish it. I think at a certain time we have to stop and say, we stop here. We cannot go on. This is the only way I can go forward.
The only way to stop atrocities is to stop war making. There has never been and never will be a war without all of the horrors and all of the atrocities I have seen in war. So how do you stop it from happening again? They're not ready. They're not ready. Maybe I get some of them ready. If I get some of them, it's a little bit. I just do the best I can, and I will continue as long as I can. I can't stop.
Lemkin was helping me with the idea obstacles are the test of my moral strength. That's it. Okay, it's a test for me. I had to manage this. That's it. We are a little piece in a long historical process, trying to improve how we live together in this world. So that's it. That's the idea to have a global community. The idea of, okay, my community is also my world, not just my neighborhood or my country.
I think the hardest part about my position is that I have great visibility into a lot of the pain that's out there. it's not someone else's responsibility, or it's not the fodder for an article. It's the fodder for thinking through what we can do about it. You exhaust the tools at your disposal. And I always think about the privilege of, of getting to try, just to try.
At the Tycho Brahe. I want them to look at the Tycho Brahe, Carrie's Tycho Brahe.
Oh, the door, the sign on the door.
It's been there for 30-some years.
Yeah, here rests Tycho Brahe.
Here lies Tycho Brahe ad infinitum.
Let me tell you a story. Tycho Brahe, an astronomer who felt that he wanted to find out the meaning of the universe. So he persuaded the king in power that he should build him an astronomical laboratory on the island of Hven. And there he built his observatory. And every night he went out and he viewed the stars and he put them down in a chart. And he had done that for about 25 years. New king came on the throne. They said, look, we've got something going on there near Elsinore. So the treasury people came out and they said, old man, wake up, wake up. The king wants to know what you've been doing here for these last 25 years. Oh, he said, I've been watching the skies. Watching the skies? What for? He said, well, I make a chart, and I have 97 volumes, exact. Each one I've measured myself, and I can tell you the movement of every one of those stars. Well, what's the use of it? What do you intend to do with that? He said, I hope to live to get 100. 100 volumes of the same thing? What's the utility? What can you do with that? Well, he said, I admit that I was trying to find out the meaning of the universe, and I haven't found it yet. But I believe that someday somebody will, and I will have saved that person 25 years of labor. And when the American astronauts landed on the moon, they had with them the tables of Tycho. So there it is. It's an inspirational story, The Watcher of the Sky. I am watching the sky. That's it.
you.